All right, welcome everybody. Happy Thursday. This is our last live of 2021. This year has been absolutely insane, and we are ending with, in Portuguese, we say it a golden key. We have one of these best speakers out there for you guys tonight, and I'm so excited to introduce Dr. Stasha Gominak to you guys. Thank you, Dr. Sasha, for coming here. Dr. Gominak attended college in California and medical school at Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, receiving her MD degree in 1983. She completed a neurology residency in 1989 at the Harvard-affiliated Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. From 91 to 2004, she practiced as general neurologist in the San Francisco Bay Area. In 2004, Dr. Gominak moved with her husband to Tyler, Texas, and began to focus on treating neurological illness by improving sleep. She published a pivotal article in 2012 proposing that the global struggle with worsening sleep was linked to reduced sun exposure. In 2016, she followed with a second article linking the change in the intestinal microbiome to the epidemic of poor sleep, and described a simple process for normalizing sleep and the intestinal bacterial population called RightSleep. In 2016, she retired from clinical practice and currently divides her time between virtual coaching sessions and teaching clinicians from a wide variety of medical and dental professions. Her popular courses and lectures help clinicians improve their patients' health and well-being by improving their sleep. Can I say any more? We're so thankful to have you here, and thanks for everything that you have done in your career. It is helping so many people.
Thank you for inviting me. I love lecturing to hygienists and oral myofunctional therapists because they actually are there on the front line with patients, and they are often moms, and so they actually have personal experience with this with children and adults. So I'll let you ask me questions if you'd like, or I'll just dive into how I got here. Which would you prefer?
I would love for you to start and let us know how you got here. Our topic today is the link between vitamin D3 or B vitamins and poor sleep. Please, the floor is all yours.
Okay, so what happened to me was a series of fortunate accidents. So the first thing that happened was this is way back in 2004 or 5, one of my daily headache sufferers. So I'm a neurologist. I had about half of my practice in headache. And one of my daily headache sufferers who had taken all the medicines I'd given her and they didn't work, said, I think I want a sleep study. And I knew nothing about sleep. So I said, no, because that's what we're like. And she said, well, I want one anyway. And she went for a sleep study and she had sleep apnea. And she was not overweight. She did not fit the usual criteria. And she put on a CPAP mask and her headaches went away. And that was, to me, totally bizarre. At the time, no one was talking, things have changed so fast in the last 15 years that now the idea that a young, healthy female that's not overweight could have sleep apnea is not weird. So she prompted me to think about headache in a very different way because I wasn't using a drug and she was putting on this torture device, blowing air up her nose. I couldn't figure how that could take the headaches away, yet it did. So I started doing sleep studies on all my young, healthy females with daily headache, which was not a population that was getting sleep studies at that time. So then I started to say, well, this gal had sleep apnea, but she does not. What's different here? She has a headache. She feels tired. She says, I'm in a bad mood. I can't remember anything. She has all the same complaints, but she doesn't have sleep apnea. So over a period of time, I learned some really important things. The first one was, my pulmonologist finally said, hey, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the population you're sending to my lab, I was sending a lot of young, healthy females for sleep studies because I felt like they're desperate. I'm desperate. We've used medicines already. They'll let you do anything, So I sent a whole bunch of people for sleep studies. And he said, this population is very different than usually who we're studying. and your patients don't have any REM sleep, any rapid eye movement sleep. And I said, well, that's not on the report. And he said, well, I know. And I was like, what? This is weird. Like, so then he started to point out things. So I learned how to read the sleep studies. I was not trained in sleep. So I entered this from a point of view of someone who's just taking care of young, healthy females with headache. But then there was this very consistent finding on these sleep studies, which was they didn't get into REM sleep, or their REM sleep was delayed, or they had REM related apnea. And when asking him what REM related apnea was, he said, well, we get the most paralyzed of all in rapid eye movement sleep. And I was like, paralyzed? Creepy. What? Why would we get paralyzed? Like, that's kind of scary. And he said it in this like matter of fact way. And I thought, I'm a neurologist. I should know that. But I didn't really know that we got paralyzed in sleep. So it turns out that in rapid eye movement sleep, we paralyze this part. There are two phases of deep sleep. In the first phase, it's called slow wave sleep, you paralyze from the neck down. But in this last phase where we do dreaming, we paralyze all this. Well, it turns out that you guys live in this area. This is what you look at all the time. So we make up explanations for why people have bruxism. We make up explanations for why people have jaw pain. We make up explanations for why the mouth and the tongue does certain things. But the interesting part is, as I've sat with the dentist and the oral myofunctional therapist over the last 5 years, the other thing that this part does is it's the constant sensory feedback to the brain that tells the brain my airway is still open. So if we get paralyzed while we're unconscious, who's running the show? You have to have a bunch of electrodes. So when you see somebody going through a supervised sleep study, you see these electrodes all over them. They're measuring the airflow, they're measuring the oxygen, they've got all these things all over. Well, the brain does the same thing with sensory input, and it is using the sensation inside the mouth, in the throat, in the face. It is using all these different methods to say, oh, we have to be paralyzed but can still breathe and swallow, or we choke on our own spit and die. Like, that's a very interesting thing to go down that path and think about that. Now, if everybody does that, and we've all been doing it since the dinosaurs, and the dinosaur's brain, in this part of the brain that sleeps, is exactly like ours, why would this be so incredibly screwed up around the globe? It's been working for millions of years. And now it's failing in all my patients. They stop breathing. Now, they did not have sleep apnea in the usual sense of just severe sleep apnea that went on CPAP. A lot of them just had this weird little segment where they would. So immediately, I'm thinking of it in a different way. I'm not thinking that there's something wrong in their throat. That doesn't mean they don't have a throat problem. It just means I wasn't thinking of it that way. And if it's only in that phase, that kind of speaks against the fact that it's, a throat mouth problem. It's not an anatomic problem here. That does not mean to negate anything that you guys do that has to do with the anatomy. Okay, so I spent the last 5 years learning what you do and being alerted to the fact that the anatomy is also extremely important. But at the time, I'm a neurologist, and from my point of view, this physiology of how we get paralyzed hangs out in the brainstem. That's my job, okay? But I don't know anything about it. So I spent several years using CPAP and sleeping pills because that's all we have. It's very frustrating. The people who have apnea get better on the CPAP, but then they don't do so well. 4 or 5 years later, they don't feel as good as they did at the beginning. That sort of suggests we're using a patch. We're patching this problem. We're doing something for the brain. We're blowing air in because the paralysis isn't right while they're sleeping. So there's a general concept in the background, which is if we all get paralyzed while we're sleeping, then these people with sleep apnea might have a paralysis problem, not a throat problem. And oh, by the way, the throat problem is not going to make them kick. So they have problems with moving their body inappropriately during sleep, and they get too paralyzed. That means if you're looking at it that way, you can focus on this one little nucleus right in the brainstem that's called the nucleus reticularis pontus oralis caudalis that nobody knows about. I didn't know about it. But it turns out to be what runs our paralysis. That means it has to be able to turn off the muscles and turn them back on again. Well, once you start to think about that as a single cell, well, how does it do that? So I'm reading these nerdy articles because that's all I think about now is sleep and how these people are not getting paralyzed correctly. And it turns out that there are articles about sticking a little wire electrode in that one cell and watching how fast the cell fires. It goes faster and slower and faster, and these scientists are dropping little chemicals on it, like epinephrine and norepinephrine and acetylcholine, neurotransmitters. And I realized as I'm reading this, one, why would they even publish this? This is nerdy stuff, but they're describing really how the brain is making us more paralyzed, less paralyzed. If they get it perfect, we're perfectly paralyzed. We still swallow, we swallow perfectly. There's a sensation of how much saliva our mouth is closed. We swallow at a certain time rate. So then I'm watching these sleep studies, realizing that their paralysis switches are malfunctioning. They're wobbling between too paralyzed part of the time and not paralyzed enough. And then I start to think, well, why do we get paralyzed? Like, that seems so scary. Maybe our body parts need to get paralyzed so they can work on them. They repair them. And all of a sudden, these 32-year-old women who have, I can't remember anything, I'm in a bad mood, and I have daily headache, they also have knee pain or ankle pain or back pain, all these pains that I was like, they're young, they're healthy, they're doing stuff. Why would they have any pain? Maybe their movement of their legs, and oh, by the way, there's this ancient walking nucleus that's right in there with these paralysis, and we walk while we're sleeping. That's why they're called periodic limb movements, because they come at a specific rate. So that sort of changes the whole way you think about sleep. Like, what is the brain doing while I'm lying there unconscious? And I was pretty trusting, like, just to lie down there and think it was going to take care of me, and now it's not. Okay, it's a very weird way to think about sleep. Now, the next thing that happens is I'm very frustrated because CPAP works for some people, but if you don't have apnea, it doesn't make any sense. If you can't sleep, which is the most common, and the most common complaint of all of these women was I wake up at 3 a.m. and I can't go back to sleep again. Or I have light sleep after that. And it's usually after the second kid, my sleep just really went to hell and it hasn't been better since. Okay. So pregnancy is playing a large role in these female patients. So I've got this all happening, but no good explanation. And then one of my patients who's 18 has a sleep study. She has daily headache. Her sleep study shows 10 solid hours of sleep. As far as she's concerned, she sleeps normally. She goes to sleep, she stays asleep. She's there for 10 hours. She does not have a single bit of deep sleep, none. She wakes to light sleep 35 times an hour. She never wakes up. She is so sleep deprived. She doesn't think she's sleep deprived because she goes to bed and then she wakes up, but she feels terrible every day. So she's got now a documented sleep study that has no deep sleep. In the midst of this, it becomes quite obvious that you can be asleep but not be healing yourself. So she has none of the phases that actually paralyze us and allow us to heal and feel better. And she had a B12 deficiency, and I have never done a B12 in a headache patient up until that time because the neurology literature does not suggest it. It says daily headache is blah, 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 and you do this. But if you go into the neurology textbooks and say, what does B12 deficiency produce? In fact, on Google, it says fatigue, daily headache, which is like, what? So I have never really looked at anything in the body from a deficiency standpoint, even though I learned a lot about nutrition and deficiency before I went to medical school. I was successfully brainwashed away from it during medical school. So she had a B12 deficiency. I'm thinking about the cells in the brainstem as a single cell, which is a very unique, funny place to be, actually. So then I'm thinking, well, what does B12 do? I don't even know. But what if these little pacemaker cells that are firing since the day you're born to the day you die, they don't have room to say, hey, take it, buddy, I'm B12 deficient. They have to sort of do their job without the raw materials they need. Could this potentially be a deficiency state? That was really the first step. So saying sleep is pivotal for healing, paralysis is pivotal for healing, getting paralyzed correctly is a biochemical complex process that we don't have to understand it. We have to understand why it went crazy, okay? It was self-assembling and working for millions of years. Every animal on the planet does this. That means we have to understand why specifically in this time frame in humans around the globe has sleep started to fail together in all ages, okay? In almost all circumstances around the planet. So I start doing B12 levels on my patients, and some of them are low, but not all of them are low. And one of my patients who has a lot of problems says, my doctor did my vitamin D level, and it was low, and she gave me a vitamin D, and my wrist pain went away. And I wouldn't have cared if she hadn't said, and my pain went away, because from my point of view, I'm still not clear on how we can have an inroad to making the paralysis better. Because the pain in many of these people is about really not getting paralyzed enough at night so that they heal whatever injury they had. They have foot pain. We're not supposed to have foot pain every day. We walk on our feet all day long. If they don't get paralyzed and we're still using them at night, then you have foot pain when you wake up in the morning. So pain was still a part of what I was thinking about here. Because she said that, I was drawing blood anyway. I threw in vitamin D. And it turns out that vitamin D is a major player in running the sleep. And the way that happened was I did all these vitamin D levels. Every single one of them was low. And then about December, and I don't know anything about D, okay? I say, I'm writing these little lab slips, 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. I don't know anything about it. I don't care about it. I'm just sending out these lab slips. And by November, I'm getting really tired of writing out 14 times, take 1,000 IUs of vitamin D. So I Xerox it. I'm completely lazy. I Xerox it so that everybody gets the same thing. And these two guys who have a D that's a little higher actually come back in December, both of them in the same week, and say, I've been wearing my CPAP for a whole year. You promised me that would take my headaches away, but it didn't. And I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. He said, no, wait for this. You sent me that little thing about the vitamin D. I went out and got vitamin D, and I started taking it. And within like 3 weeks, my sleep got better and my headaches went away. I was like, whoa, every single person I've done a D level on has been low. What was vitamin D have to do with sleep? It shouldn't have anything to do with it. It's all about bones. So 2 men in the same week say the same thing. It turns out their D levels were a little higher than the women, and they weren't deficient per se. They were in the 40s. All the women, including me, were 20s, 30s. So that prompts me to go search for vitamin D in sleep. There are no hits on that. At the time, there were no articles linking those two. But vitamin D in the brain pops up with this guy who's been writing about vitamin D receptors. Where are vitamin D molecules being listened to? Where are the receptors throughout our body? And he happens to have done this totally wacky experiment measuring the nucleus reticularis, pons oralis, caudalis, and that there are vitamin D receptors in there. Like, how would you even know where that was? It's such a peculiar thing. So I pull up this article with that, and sure enough, there are vitamin D receptors all over it. And I'm like, wait, these are the sleep switches. How come nobody has thought about this? This is crazy. So I call this guy up and I say, listen, I just had this really interesting clinical observation that all of my patients who have sleep disorders of various kinds have vitamin D deficiency. Has anybody written about that? And he says, no. He's like now retired. That's why I would take my phone call. So he's retired, but he's been a scientist he's in his early 80s now. But he's written for 30 years about vitamin D in this extremely intelligent way that it turns out no one else will listen to. So he says, no, but that makes perfect sense. Vitamin D runs hibernation. I'm like, oh, duh. Well, that means sleep. And it also means that's why all these women always have thyroid issues, because D runs the thyroid runs the energy level. If you're going to go lie in the ground for 6 months and feed your cubs, you pull the energy level down. So you do that using the thyroid hormone. So this guy, his name is Walter Stump. He's a neuroendocrine chemist he's put together this idea about what the D is about back in 1981. Since 1981, this guy has been writing articles saying, this is a chemical we make on our skin. It runs the entire endocrine system. Why? Because it would be really convenient to have your babies at the time when there's food. Like if you don't have your babies when there's food, they die. Duh. So, one, as you move away from the equator, every single animal that moves away from the equator has to be able to coordinate what they do. So when there are two sexes and they mate, they have to mate at a certain time of the year. That means our fertility, our metabolism, and our sleep are fully coordinated based on D levels. That means animals that live at the far north and south either hibernate or they migrate. They fly or they swim to the equator. Duh. So at the same time, I have this house in Mexico, and we go there in January, and there are all these amazing birds that are there in January because they've come from distant places. Now, the second thing is, I've been in Mexico wandering around looking at these people who are Mayan, who are still living in little stick houses, thinking, when we go to these little towns where they don't even have electricity and they don't even speak Spanish, they only speak Mayan, you cannot tell if someone's 45 years old or 85. There's still populations there, like there are in Brazil, where people are still digging in the dirt and living outdoors. There is no electricity. They do not live inside because when you don't have electricity or a television and you're living in a stick house, you live outdoors. That means they are really still staying in a traditional form of life that all animals follow. If you're not a nocturnal animal, you spend your entire day outside. There is very little food in your little hidey hole. That was the truth for humans as well. So as I'm watching all this, I'm thinking, this idea that all of our problems are about toxins would still kind of wash because we're out in the bush here. But what if we look at it in a different way and we say all these people that are still digging in the dirt with a stick, still going to their milpa, still planting corn and beans, they don't have sleep apnea and they're not obese. And now the vitamin D falls in my lap, and all of a sudden everything just falls into place. Now, after that, it was a nightmare because vitamin D is so incredibly misunderstood. So I still am struggling now, 12 years later, with why Walter's point of view about this chemical is not just accepted by all the other scientists. And that's a long story, but ultimately, here's what happened. I start everybody on vitamin D. We don't know what we're doing. It's a hormone. It is not a vitamin. That is such a difficult thing to get around. Neurologists don't use hormones. We give drugs. That's what we do. Hormones are set up so that we move every single day. We move back and forth around a midpoint. That's what they're for. You never give them once a month. You never give them once a week. The body makes them every day, and then they affect multiple organs to keep certain things moving along. Okay? So I'm giving a hormone that I know nothing about. I have very bad experiences. I don't exactly know what I'm doing with it. We all get better and then we all get worse again. And my question was, if everybody has a low D and everybody can't sleep for no apparent reason, is there a vitamin D blood level that would mean that my patients could sleep better? And that was very simple. It's a simple question. My patient comes back and I say, how you doing? You're taking 10,000. We got to 10,000 very slowly because 1,000 was what we're recommended. And then we take 2,000 and I take 2,000 and my level is 38 in August and now it's 29. And I'm like, what? Why are they telling us to take 1,000? So it's extremely confusing, but over a period of a year, 2 years, it becomes clear that there is a specific blood level, not a specific dose, but a specific blood level like every other hormone in the body. It is not about the dose, it is about the blood level. So I published this article with Walter using his scientific observations, my clinical observations, saying 60 to 80 nanograms per mil is the blood level for better sleep. And that has continued to be consistent. Now, I would recommend most people stay in the 60s. And there's a big, huge, several-hour lecture about blood levels. But Here's the most important thing for you to take away from this lecture. At 2 years, we all got better, and then we got worse again. And our levels were still in the 60s, but we were feeling really awful. Okay? This is the most important message. It's never, ever one thing. And you move one hormone, everything else is going to move too. Okay? Now, the final outcome was my patients are doing badly. They have a lot of pain. A couple of people come in with burning in their hands and feet. It's the same kind of burning that does burning mouth. They have burning in their hands and feet. I'm a neurologist. Neuropathy is my subspecialty. I've only seen burning in the hands and feet maybe 2 times in 30 years. Very uncommon. Maybe the feet common, but not in the hands and feet, and not in young, healthy females that have nothing else wrong with them. B12 is one of the players in that, but they were already on B12. So I can't do that. And I'm trying to avoid their questions. I got 2 women in my practice come in within a month. That kind of suggests that I have produced this problem. That made me very uncomfortable. And by weird coincidence that I think was destiny, one of my clients brought in a book about pantothenic acid, which is one of the B vitamins. I am not interested in vitamins, so I wouldn't read it, of course. And then about 6 weeks later, she shows up. So just to feel like I was open-minded, I read it. And the reason why she brought it was because this was a gal giving pantothenic acid in large doses to rheumatoid arthritis patients. And she commented that not only did their pain get better, but their sleep got better. And she had references. So ultimately, what it turns out to be is D is not only about our metabolism. D is about the metabolism of the bugs in the belly. So this picture was developing over 10 years, but I'm going to give you the summary, what finally came out to be true, is that D is needed by the 4 phyla of the normal, healthy gut bacteria. That means if you lose your D because you just had 2 kids and you put on sunscreen and you do everything we've told you to do, then you have 2 big problems. And that's when you get sick. The D by itself usually doesn't make somebody sick. But when the D goes low long enough, 2 or 3 years, so that you lose your gut bacteria, the next piece turns out to be extremely important. Those gut bacteria actually make all 8 Bs. If you've never thought about this before, it is really weird that there's a vitamin A, and then there's 8 vitamin Bs, and then there's C and D and E. Like, why would there be 8 things called B? It's because originally they actually were bacterial growth factors. They grew them in a petri dish. The bugs make these vitamins and then they purify them. And the original publications are that these are bacterial growth factors. Well, it turns out that the bacteria have been here for billions of years. And then we, multi-celled organisms with a poop channel, actually have taken advantage of the fact that there are bacteria in there, and they actually feed us all 8 Bs. It does not come from the food. So vitamin deficiency states are not about how you eat. Now, that's not completely true, and we can discuss that more about prebiotics. But in the actual reality is you feed your bugs, and then your bugs feed you. Okay, now that's in the GI literature now. The piece that was missing was, oh, if you lost your D, then you lost your bugs, giving you D only. And this is why I have a website. If you take D by itself and you do not bring back your microbiome, which is not that hard to do, but it does not happen from probiotics, you have to restart them. You have to say, oh, they're missing what they need. Well, what did they used to have? They used to have 4 phyla. They secreted these 8 chemicals. They are symbiotic organisms. Well, I gave them D, but I did not give them Bs. And in actual fact, when you give somebody B50 and D, it takes 3 months and all the bugs are back. So they aren't that picky, but they need D, and they need a D over 40. You let your D go down below 40 and stay there, you will lose your bugs. But to bring them back, you need a B soup, which was actually their encouragement from their other buddies. So you've got a bunch of bugs down there now that are not making Bs. You have a few guys, like a few survivors of the friendly, happy, healthy bacteria. If you give them this starter soup, B soup with a B50, B50 means a B complex that has 8 chemicals, all 50 milligrams, so they're high dose. and you take that combination of D and B50 for 3 months, your bugs will come back. And these really miraculous things started to happen. One, when I gave B100 and pantothenic acid as 400 milligrams, the 2 gals with the burning immediately got better. But everybody else got really pissed off at me because they came back and said, I took what you told me to, but I got very agitated and I couldn't sleep at all. So mistake number one is this book and every place else on the internet says 400 milligrams of pantothenic acid is the right dose. But it turns out if you have a normal D level, which was unique about my patient population, it acted like B5 plus D were synergistic. And one, if the dose is right, you sleep like a baby. If the dose is wrong, you can't sleep at all. That is really creepy. Okay, this chemical that's supposed to be a vitamin, like it can't hurt us, sitting there innocently on the shelf, can make you sleepless and make you feel awful in a day, in less than a day, in a few hours. And it produces this feeling of being revved up. And the weird part was the patients would come back. I had no experience with this, and there's nobody writing about it, and say exactly the same thing. I was agitated, I was revved up, I couldn't calm down. So one, this B5 stuff is dangerous. You have to understand the dosing. Now, I didn't have any place to understand the dosing. I gave the dose that was recommended. A couple of my patients fired me. They were understandably angry, but I'm giving the recommended dose. Now, I just spent 2 years with D, and I realized that the recommendations about D are ridiculous. They are completely not based in science. And the recommendations about B5 the same. That means who am I supposed to trust? So it's not like I knew at the beginning that giving D plus B50 will bring the bugs back. What I wanted was to have to not take on the responsibility of the dosing of this stuff because it struck me as being dangerous. If my thought was, what if these bees, what happened was I read this review article about bees that said, riboflavin, colonic bacteria source and a food source. Thiamine, colonic bacteria source and food source. And I was like, wait a minute. Does that mean all these bees are being made by the bacteria? And if they are, why are we being told that they came from the food? And I know their IBS didn't go away when we did this D thing, that was still remaining. Does that imply that really the bugs are what's making the bees? If that's true, then maybe if I give them the bees, it will encourage those certain populations that make and use and need bees to come back. But then, what if they grow back? It's going to be like when they yelled at me because the dose was too high. Like if they grow back and their sleep and their pain got much better, but now there are two sources, my pill and your belly, this is going to be bad. So I started telling my patients, look, I'm thrilled that your pain is gone. I'm thrilled your sleep is better. But if I'm right in this idea, then if it all falls apart abruptly, sometime in the next few months, I don't know if it's going to work, then you better stop that B50. And that's exactly what happened. So at 3 months, you have to stop the B50. If you do not, then you will start to get back the same things you had before. Sleep interruption, pain of whatever type, anxiety, AD, whatever you had. So the peculiar part about this is it challenges many general ideas about vitamins. One, vitamins can't hurt you. That is wrong. They can really mess you up. Really hard is all the things I had before that I was told were hypothyroidism or ADHD or endometriosis. Those things that I was given as diagnoses were all vitamin deficiency related things, but we didn't tell you that. That means when you take these vitamins, if you go too high, those things will come back again. Okay, that is a very different idea. We've been giving recommendations for doses of vitamins without any real knowledge that each person can be in a different place regarding where they need these B vitamins. So you can become deficient in Bs because you take D. Even if you take 1,000, even if you take 1,000 for 10 years, you will eventually start to make more healing. You will sleep better, and then you will use up your Bs, and then B-related diseases will result, and we'll give them various names like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus or psychosis, or we'll make up all these names for them. So in the background, the thing that made the difference was vitamins are tools that can then produce or destroy sleep. It can be either way. And if you don't listen to your body, so this is a really different approach. I listen to my own body and then I decide what this vitamin should be doing for me. Okay, so the next 10 years is all about my patients coming back and saying, well, you told me to do this. And then I said, well, I'm sorry, it didn't work, but you look really good. Like, what did you do? Well, I did this. I'm like, oh, well, what is that? What happened to you? So we are currently in a time where medicine thinks they know everything. If things don't work, it must be because your genes are wrong. But we have this big wedge of the pie that was completely missed. That means when you do this RightSleep program, the reason why I have a workbook is there's a timeline on which this happens. Certain weird things happen to you in the first 3 months, and then the next 3 months, and then 6 months into it, often we need slightly more bees for some peculiar reason that I don't really understand. So ultimately, what I got to see was there is a way to treat people who do not have sleep apnea, who may or may not have an anatomic part that you guys are playing. And what I want you to think about this as is when you do your interventions, or when you see somebody that you look at their mouth and you say, whoa, bad shit's going on in their body. This is terrible, okay? So when you're looking at that, you are thinking of the anatomic cure you're going to use, and then you have certain successes. The ones that don't succeed are where you want to have something else, okay? There's something else in the background. Or we did this intervention and this got better, but these 3 other things did not. So similar to what my experience was, where I'm sending people to have various things done to them, CPAP and now, oral appliances. The ones that succeed, you don't think about. They don't keep you awake at night. But the ones where you don't succeed, you're thinking, well, there must be something else that's missing. I picture what I do as a little tiny sliver of that. It's not that diet, exercise, and the interventions, anatomically that Dr. Park just talked about are not important. It's that there's another side of it. There's a physiologic side of it. And oddly enough, in the young population over the last 20 years, what Dr. Park is really good at is the changes anatomically in the lower face in not only US, but all around the world. And that has to do with keeping your mouth closed while you're sleeping, while the brain is sensing what's going on. And the upper and lower jaws do not develop normally when kids are not able to close their mouth while they're sleeping. So there are big anatomic implications of this. So having said all that, now I'm going to let you ask questions.
I am speechless. You are fantastic. What an incredible.
My patients are fantastic. They came back after I made a mistake and I didn't know what, the big change is saying, I don't know why you can't sleep. We don't feel comfortable doing that as MDs. We're really trained out of it. When you say, I don't know why, but I'll keep going with you. I'll try things. I mean, that's really one of the things where your subspecialties are really always trying stuff with people.
Mm-hmm.
We don't talk about that perhaps, and when you talk to a dentist or an MD, because of this social caste system that humans always have, you're treated as though your information is somehow inferior, but you're there with the anatomy and people come back and tell you important things. You see their kids change. That means the actual physical experience with the patient is the only truth, really. But you have to get your mind into that place first, and be willing. So from your side, you have to be emboldened to say, no, what I'm seeing, I believe in. I don't care if this dentist doesn't understand what I'm talking about. This is real.
Wow, incredible. We have so many questions coming in on Facebook and over here on the chat. I'm going to start with the chat box. The first question that we have is from Jennifer. I have had a significant number of patients who have migraines, poor sleep, and many reasons to suggest they may have apnea, resistant to testing though, that also struggle with infertility. Any
Yep.
links you've come across?
Infertility is directly a vitamin D problem. Directly. It's in the OBGYN literature now. And it is shocking and horrible that people are spending literally millions of dollars to do things when there are articles that show when your D goes low, there's an inhibitory hormone. Why? Because you don't want to have a kid when there's no food. The food comes from the sun. That's how we've survived as multi-celled organisms over millions of years. We were able to sublimate our fertility until there was food for the babies. That this is all clearly spelled out in the OBGYN literature. Vitamin D, get your D above 40, you will not have infertility. It affects both males and females. It will affect sperm development as well. On my website, I have a workbook on how to do this in adults, but I also have 2 sets of videos. One of them is for fertility and pregnancy and your first year with your baby. How to do this program to get pregnant. You must have a microbiome that's back, because the bees that actually allow your baby, your developing fetus, to develop normally. We know that all the malformations, midline malformations, mouth, back of the nervous system are fusion problems in the first 10 weeks that are B vitamin deficiencies. That means the infertility is D related, but the development of a healthy fetus is related to you having the correct microbiome. So you really want to do this before you get pregnant, but you can also do it while you're pregnant. So I go through those different states. There's also a set of videos about doing this in children in various age groups. So you can't really give a 1-year-old, pills of D. So you have to find different ways to do it. And you have to recognize whether or not your child needs these treatments, okay? We're focusing on sleep disorders, and if your child doesn't have a sleep disorder, is there anything else? Well, what if I don't know that it's normal for a child to sleep at age 3 from 7 p.m. until 6 a.m.? Because none of our kids do that anymore. It is not normal to wake up for a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old to wake up during the night. It's not normal under any circumstances. They don't ask for dry go water. They do not have any trouble falling asleep. Normal children with high Ds do not have sleep disorder. So I have to kind of redefine for you, how would I know if my child had a sleep disorder? Because the current circumstances, if you're buying broccoli and you're talking to your friend who has a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old, when you complain that they're constantly climbing in bed with you, your friend's going to say, yeah, ours do too. But neither one of those families are operating normally. So we have video sets about those.
Great. And I will post Dr. Gominak's website on Airway Circle for those trying to find it, so you guys can quickly go over there. Anne has a question. What about those who have digestive issues and malabsorption? How can they regulate the right dose of vitamin D and B vitamins if there are constant chronic acute gut fluctuations?
You have to think of it this way. Every other animal on this planet just pops out a baby, and then their baby grows up, and they don't have IVs. We are self-assembling. It's miraculous. We are self-assembling, and our microbiome becomes established because the mom who's outdoors has enough D in her breast milk to support those bugs as they develop in the baby. So, this is all worked on its own. Way before doctors came, way before scientists came. It's not that hard. So it turns out all of this malabsorption, it's not as simple as I'm going to make it, because there are some complexities to the depth of the disease. But you get your bugs back, and right off the bat, they are helping you turn back to having no problems with malabsorption. So the malabsorption is inherent in this D microbiome problem. So it's an easy answer. The workbook tells you what to do if you can't tolerate bees at the beginning. But you can't assume that you're going to stay that way. Humans did not cover this planet like cockroaches because we were these weak, fragile animals. We covered it because we can actually survive in any environment. We can have these funny, limited weird diets and still be strong and actually kill all the other animals on the planet. So there is a current dogma that says, oh, you can't absorb that. It's because your bugs aren't right. Your bugs are playing a huge role in what you can absorb. So the first step, get your bugs back. That doesn't mean it's simple and you'll never have GI tract issues again. Because the GI tract, once you get the bugs back, is still run by the nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system, that's all over the place. If you start reading about many, many diseases, everybody has heart rate variability that's wrong. The sympathetic side is too high. It's directly linked into this. The autonomic nervous system runs the GI tract. So when you're doing this B vitamin stuff, you will still have GI tract complaints, and that's a very deep answer. There are still issues with celiac disease, autoimmune disease. The thing that makes the difference here is that you're looking for good sleep. Vitamins do not cure anything. Vitamins are tools. The bricks are sitting here. If you do not have the right phases of sleep, the bricks never are touched by the bricklayer and make the repairs. The vitamins are just tools. So there's a real depth of understanding here. So I don't want to blow off your question, but RightSleep is the way that you cure all those malabsorptive problems.
Perfect. I think it's Dr. Hernandez is saying, thank you for being so open, curious, and an amazing advocate for your patients. Question number 1, what are your views on adding K2 to D?
You have to remember that I was doing this with people who had regular allopathic physicians. Okay, so they're in there because they have a neurologic problem. At the time I started with this D stuff, I realized that I didn't think it was weird for a 42-year-old to be taking 4 medicines. I mean, I thought they had a good internist. But as I'm getting older, I'm thinking, I'm not taking those. I mean, I'm not going to take those. Like, why am I thinking that that's normal?
Uh-huh.
So when I did this program, I'm trying to convince people who are already on 4 or 5 medicines that they should have 4 other pill bottles that they open up in the morning and have to take all this other stuff that they don't even really believe in. So it's not that K2 isn't important. K2 is a hormone. K2 takes the calcium once it's directed into the body by the D, and it directs it into places where we need calcium. So it helps calcium be deposited in the bones, not in places where it doesn't belong. Now, most of the multivitamins that I'm using that are generic, easy, cheap multivitamins have K2 in them, and the bugs make K2. That was our primary source. So even though it is in the diet, K2 is not on the top of my list. I don't really care about their bones. I care about their sleep. Now, there are certain circumstances where you really want to add K2. If you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, then you want to add K2 because you'd like to reverse that, and you could use K2 as a little helper. But keep in mind, it's still a hormone. That means you don't take it for the rest of your life. You take it with the intention of getting to a final endpoint. Your bone density study shows that your bone density is increasing. Then eventually you get to come off of it.
Those people who are being diagnosed with early osteoporosis, is there a way to reverse it?
Absolutely. RightSleep.
Wow.
And you know what's really sad? If doctors are really paying attention, so if you haven't watched Dope Sick, I really recommend it. Okay, this is a series that's about how we physicians were completely bamboozled by a drug company that taught us that pain wasn't being treated correctly. And I was one of those doctors. It was so embarrassing to watch this. Our whole approach to medicine has been slowly over the last 40 years directed toward medications instead of, well, I don't want to take those medicines. I just want to be healthy and not go to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
So ultimately, the way that I forget what the question was now. What did we ask? What did you ask me?
If there was a way to reverse osteoporosis.
Oh, you would think, since D has only been famous for bones, and we've known about it since 1940, you would think that there was a well-studied recommendation for a specific blood level to prevent osteoporosis. Like, I mean, that makes perfect sense. If we know it's about bones, osteoporosis and osteopenia is a vitamin D deficiency state. That is clearly shown. Yet, there are no studies that document that if you get the vitamin D to be from 40 to 50, you will never develop osteoporosis. Why is there no literature like that? Because there is no drug company supplying the $18 million that it would take to take a population of 35-year-olds and follow them for 30 years, not having any profit, just making sure they stayed out in the sun and took something that's free. That means no one profits from it, but that is really what all of us as humans want. I don't want to have to take Boniva and those injections. I don't want to ever develop it. Yet those recommendations do not exist today, which is really weird.
We really need a reverse and having healthy people pay for health insurance instead of sick people. Sick people get everything for free. Healthy people pay for health insurance. Let's see what we
and
change.
what if I don't want to have health insurance because I would like to provide myself with the education to not be sick? That doesn't even exist in medicine today, really. I mean, that's not true. There is a whole subculture. That's why we're here. There's a whole subculture of normal humans who say, I don't think I want to give my kids those medicines. I don't think I want to take them myself. Isn't there a way for us not to need medicines? So the public is where this is a growing desire to learn, which is fantastic.
We've had a few people ask about children. What is the correct dosage for children for vitamin D?
There is not a correct dosage. That is why there is a video series.
Depending on the child, you just mentioned that depending on
every
each
single
child
kid is different. Do not give your children vitamin D if you have not measured their blood levels. This is a big commitment. You're giving them a hormone that you don't know anything about that could potentially make them worse. Learn about it first.
Wow. Can you post the articles that she's discussing? Yes, I'll look for them. We'll try to post them for you guys. Can you post recommended blood level? We just talked about that. And for vitamin B's, recommendations with pediatric patients. But what do we do? What dosage? Let's go watch RightSleep. And like that, you guys, I will post her website so you guys can get there. Thank you so much.
Your first reaction to this is the right one. Okay, I want to do this. What do I take? There are sections on the website that explain to you in bare bones, basics, what you're going to do. But you really need to get the workbook. This is a timeline of things that you need to observe. And because there are blood tests for D, but most of the other things that are going to happen are about you experiencing things in your body or your child experiencing things in their body that you have to connect to what the B doses are. The blood levels of the B vitamins do have no reflection on what's happening inside the cell. So we can't use the blood levels. Even though there are published blood levels and there are recommendations of dosing, they are completely made up, I'm sorry to say. So you actually have to learn that you have to listen to what your body says and then interpret whether or not you're on the right thing. That sounds overwhelming, and it kind of is. That's why I have a workbook to help you.
This is perfect. Let's do one more question. We talked about the levels. We talked about absorption. We talked about, if you'd like to go a little bit deeper on the RightSleep program, you're welcome to. But the last one is on, oh my goodness, there were some good ones here from Anne. Which one am I going to do? If there's a difference between synthetic D supplemented versus D from the sun.
Let me take that question. This is really important. Okay. Now, currently, the state of vitamin D recommendations is a disaster. Okay. There are very intelligent, really well-versed scientists who have done D research who have never actually interacted with anyone as a clinician. And they give all sorts of recommendations. I've worked in vitamin D for 30 years, and I take 100,000 IUs on a piece of bread once a month or once a week, okay? They do not know what they're talking about because they are not following people over time, Okay. As soon as you realize that there are vitamin D receptors in the brainstem sleep switches, that means you can take someone's life by taking their sleep away. Okay. That's really what's happening around the globe. But it also means if you don't know what you're doing with this chemical, it's dangerous. And there are vitamin D receptors in basically every organ of the body. Okay. Now, there's also this simplistic approach which says D has this storage chemical and it has this active chemical, and the kidney does this. They've simplified it to a degree that even the people who you would think are experts are oversimplifying how you should use this. There is a current literature over the last 15 years from a guy who entered this field from skin. So he started to look at it from a different way. So he's not brainwashed about bones and D and all these other things. And he shows that there's a specific enzyme that we use naturally in our body to take cholesterol to make pregnenolone. Pregnenolone is the first steroid chemical that then becomes the adrenal hormones, all the sex hormones. So all of our sex hormones and most of our other hormones, aside from thyroid and a few other things, are made from cholesterol. He thinks, well, this enzyme that makes all these steroid hormones, I wonder if it would recognize vitamin D. And of course it does. And it makes an array of Ds. Okay. The first question was, is it the same to take a pill as it is to go out in the sun? And I think the answer is resoundingly no. It's not the same. It's going to be a long time before we clarify this, but it looks to me like when we take the pills, we're doing the best we can, but it is not the same as being outdoors. It is not the same as being in the sun. And more importantly, being outdoors is not just about UVB light and D. Being outdoors actually has multiple wavelengths of light. And if you get into this literature a little bit, you will find that there are many other wavelengths that either go through the eye, that are related to vitamin A, the retinoids that run our 24-hour clock, but there are many other energy wavelengths that make us have a healthy body. That means the move indoors is what hurt us. It is not just being exposed to the sun. So being outdoors is going to be one of the things that's going to mean that you're going to have a healthier life. So that is a complicated answer, because then as I try to look at how much I'm outdoors, I'm looking if I'm outside of like an hour. Okay, so what should I do about that? Well, we do the best we can with the pills. We learn about the vitamin D, but we also start to learn about, oh, when do I actually do the best? How much time do I actually spend outside? Is that natural for myself or my kids? No, it's not natural to be indoors. So then you start to read about the blue blocking glasses and the various wavelengths, but all of those experiences then together are the path that you lead for the rest of your life to slowly get your sleep to get better and stay better. It's not a simple answer of one particular chemical.
My gosh, we have so many more questions. Maybe we can have you come back, you and Dr. Park
I'd love
together.
to come back.
How about that? So I am going to save some good questions that I had over here for later. I will talk to Dr. Park and see if he wants to come back with Dr. Gominak. That will
I
be
like him. He's really a good speaker too.
Yes, that would be amazing. I do have something to offer you guys. You guys know that I love to give stuff away. I see many familiar faces over here, but I also see some people that are not members of Airway Circle yet. So if you guys go right now and join the annual membership of Airway Circle, I'm going to pick somebody to give the RightSleep workbook to. We will give you guys one of Dr. Stasha Gominak's RightSleep workbook. But you have to go tonight, as soon as this live is over, go to airwaycircle.com, click on memberships, join now, and pick the annual option for our membership. We'll have, I think, 43 Zoom lives that we have done this year, plus clubhouses, which are audio only, that we have done. We have several of those. So there's so much amazing content. We have a research folder that you guys have access to, product discounts, and we have just built this amazing community, of professionals that are all nerds. We all love reading.
I'm so proud of you guys for doing this. This is really the right thing to do.
Thank you. We love reading research articles while somebody else is reading the newspaper. But I do want to touch a little bit, guys, before we go on what's going on, since this is our last live of the year. On Tuesday, we have Circle Time. Everybody who's an Airway Circle member is welcome to it. It's going to be all about case studies for myofunctional therapy. It's all about experience. When there's so many amazing orofacial myofunctional therapists out there that are going to be with us. We're going to have special guests. We're going to have research reviews, product reviews. And then we're going to be able to share about our patients. If you have a patient that you don't know what to do with, that you have tried, bring them on. And we have, we're going to have so much experience in the room to help you. That's going to be once a month. So join us before it's too late. And January 14th is our course with Dr. Dan Hinson. He's a dentist and does everything about breathing from Australia. If you guys have not had the chance to listen to him, please join us also. I think that is pretty much it toward the end of the year now. Since we're not doing any lives, I'm still going to be doing a lot of giveaways here and there. So stay tuned on our Instagram page. We have an amazing Facebook page with 1,400 professionals now, all multidisciplinary from every specialty you can think of. And it's always an amazing community to ask questions and find somebody to collaborate with that lives close to you. But anyways, I think this is it. Thank you so much. I mean, it's literally the night to drop the mic, isn't it? This was absolutely fantastic. I do not have enough words to thank you for being here, Dr. Stasha. And we cannot wait to have you back. Thank you for everything that you
I'll be happy to come back.
All right.
And we can do a little bit more. We'll do a little more advanced, and I'll do some slides of the chemistry in the background.
That will be perfect. All right, guys, I'm about to go pick somebody to give the RightSleep workbook to. So make sure if you're not an Airway Circle member, go right now and join. And I'm going to go pick and let you guys know by tomorrow morning who wins. All righty.
Bye-bye. Have a Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye. Merry Christmas to everybody.